This time we look at classic motorcycles with tiny 80cc engines. Over the years in the motorcycle industry there have been quite a wide variety of different capacities. Sometimes this is simply because it's an easy modification from a smaller engine. Sometimes it's because it fits in with a tax law and insurance law in a particular country or market. And this is often the case with 80cc motorcycles. They're often a bit cheaper to tax and insure in many countries than slightly larger 125s or 100s. Also, they're just a tiny bit bigger than a 50cc, so they make a fairly simple and straightforward modification from a small moped to an 80cc, and they give you a handy jump in power between the two. And so here are 5 classic 80cc motorcycles. The Kawasaki AR80. The Kawasaki AR80 is also called the Ninja 80RR in Malaysia and the Micra Magnum in places like Thailand. It was manufactured between 1992 and 1998 and was available in essentially 2 different forms. The first was an air-cooled version of the engine with 79cc's, a 6-speed gearbox and a top speed of 120 km an hour. This version is mostly seen in Japan and in Europe and the UK, and a later liquid-cooled variant. This was of course sold mostly in Southeast Asia, but the model was also put on sale in South American countries. This model would be later expanded out to 100cc's and would remain on sale in these regions all the way up until 2003. In the United Kingdom, the bike became extremely popular after the advent of the 125 law, as a lot of kids simply couldn't afford the insurance costs or the upfront sale costs of a 125. The AR80, however, offered a sporty looking package at a lower insurance premium. And of course, even compared to a 125, this bike is extremely light and compact. It's very narrow too, so it's very easy to flick around. The 125 feels like a big bike by comparison. Whether this is a good or a bad thing is simply a matter of opinion. But for 17-year-old kids in the UK, it did make for a very affordable and very easy to ride package. The bike sold in the UK in the early 80s used the air-cooled version of the 79cc engine. It made a very handy 10.2 horsepower, which by comparison is almost as much if not more than a lot of Chinese 125s around today. And this impressive output was produced at a relatively low 8,500 RPM. This was then channeled through a 6-speed gearbox to make the most of that slightly peaky, very tiny engine, and then by a chain to some very lightweight cast wheels with very narrow tyres and onto the road. Oiling, of course, for a Japanese bike by this point was automatic, and general reliability of the bike was pretty good. At the front was a very small diameter disc brake with a drum at the rear, but with a dry weight of just 78 kilos, the setup proved more than enough to bring the bike to a stop very quickly. Overall, this tiny disc valve machine would make an excellent alternative to the larger 125s and 100s, and would sell extremely well in the UK up until 1998 when it was finally phased out. But by that point, of course, two-strokes were very much on the way out in Europe, so ultimately Kawasaki would not deem it necessary or appropriate to introduce the liquid-cooled version into the European market, and instead they began to concentrate their efforts all on simple 4-stroke machines, and away from more sport-style learner bikes. In fact, Kawasaki wouldn't return to this sector of the market until 2019 with their Ninja 125. The Suzuki K10. The Suzuki K10 80cc 2-stroke was released in the UK market in 1963. The origins of this bike go back a little further, in fact back as far as 1952, because it was in this year that 60cc 2-strokes and 90cc 4-strokes no longer required a driving test to be ridden on the roads. Hence the large number of unusual 60cc 2-stroke engines seen on Japanese domestic market products, and of course the Honda 90, because its 4-stroke engine also fitted into this law very nicely. So to meet this demand, Suzuki developed the M15 50cc 2-stroke, and it was this machine which would later be developed into the K10, although the K10 itself was actually quite a bit heavier and a much more developed machine, although visually very similar indeed. the machine is fairly typical of Japanese bikes of the period. So that's pressed steel frame, 2-stroke engine, drum brakes all round, topped up with a nice chrome tank. And let's not forget that very practical, fully enclosed chain. The bike is fairly crude by the standards that we've come to expect from later Japanese bikes. For example, there's no automatic oiling. Best to remember that this machine was pitched up against bikes such as the BSA Beagle, and compared to those machines, it would have felt very advanced indeed. And in fact, in many markets, the machine was even fitted with tiny indicators. But having just 79 cc's, even if the bike only weighed 70 kilos, did not make for really good performance, and this was a fairly modest performer in terms of top speed. Top speed somewhere just over the 50 miles an hour mark in ideal conditions. So it's no great surprise that the machine wasn't on the market for too long, being replaced by a 100cc version in the mid-60s. The Yamaha Ty80. The Yamaha Ty80 was, as you can see, a trial-style motorcycle. Production started in 1974, and it was produced alongside its 50cc 125, 175 and 250 stablemates. The machine featured what was actually a 72cc single-cylinder air-cooled 2-stroke engine with a 4-speed gearbox. That gearbox being slightly unusual by modern standards because neutral was at the bottom of the cluster rather than being 1 down 4 up, as you might expect, for example, in a later gearbox. The machine wasn't really designed as a competition serious trials bike, but rather as an inexpensive, easy to use first introduction to the sport. A GT version was available in some markets, so the bike was indeed available in road legal trim. And one very handy feature which isn't included on most competition bikes was the fact that the bike had automatic oiling with a small tank just under the seat. So the owner was at least spared the ritual of pre-mixing the petrol and the oil before going out for a ride. The machine was designed with the assistance of British trials legend Mick Andrews in 1974 and remained pretty much unchanged throughout its production run. The machine may have been built down to a price, but it was nevertheless a very competent little machine. That excellent little Ty80 engine developing a good spread of torque, making life very easy for the novice rider. And while it may not have been cutting edge, it wasn't after all designed to be, it provided an excellent starting point for many successful trials riders the world over, and so I think merits a mention here simply because of its contribution to the world of trials. The Honda MBX80. The MB series, alongside its more off-road orientated MT series, was introduced by Honda into Europe in 1979. These new machines were targeted very much to the European learner market, where Honda had found that 4-strokes, even their twin cylinders, had not been particularly popular of late. So the company was forced to leave its beloved 4-strokes aside for a while and develop a range of 2-stroke machines. The MBX80 was fitted with a liquid-cooled single-cylinder 2-stroke 80cc engine. The 80 was introduced alongside a 50cc version for the moped market. Both would feature a single disc at the front and a drum at the rear, and comp-style wheels. The machines were extremely successful, prompting Honda to release the MT series of off-roaders shortly afterwards. To help sales in the EU, Honda produced the bikes in factories in Spain, Belgium and Sweden, and these factories would produce enlarged versions of the motors for the MTX 125 and 200 series. The MBX80's engine was surprisingly potent, producing around 12 PS, so more or less in the same ballpark as a modern 125, and very close to the 12 horsepower limit imposed on British market 125s at the time. So here was a bike that provided the average British rider with 125 performance, with lower all-out costs and lower tax and insurance of course. The bike weighed in at 104 kilograms fully fueled, so it wasn't the lightest machine in class at the time. But compared to a modern 125, this is a very lightweight and nimble package. Of course, that's assuming you could find one, because these bikes are becoming increasingly rare. They were simply used, abused and thrown away back in the 80s, with not much thought given to any future usage. But now of course the markets have changed, and the MBX and the MTX are appreciating small classics. The RUP RMT 80. Now occasionally I do like to throw the odd wild card into these videos. This time it's from the good old US of A and Rupp Industries. Rupp Industries was based in Mansfield, Ohio in the USA. It was founded by Mickey Rupp in 1959 and is best known for producing off-road machines, go-karts, mini-bikes and snowmobiles. In 1972, Rupp introduced the RMT. They realised they needed something larger than a mini-bike. The bike's still quite small, but with its 17 and 16 inch wheels looked more like a regular sized machine than the monkey style bikes that they produced previously. And in the US the bike was available with a full light set and was quite road legal. The bike's extremely compact dimensions meant that it was accessible to pretty much anybody, although if I was a 6-footer I'd probably find it quite difficult to fit on, with any comfort at least. Brakes all round with drums, and generally it's a fairly standard package, in other words, telescopic forks and twin rear shocks. The bike was powered by an 80cc single-cylinder 2-stroke engine with a 4-speed gearbox and piston porting induction made by Fuji Industries in Japan. Unfortunately for Rupp, the RMT was not successful, and production ended in 1975 after just 3 years. Tell us, what other collections of bikes would you like to see featured in our videos? Or do you own a machine that you'd like to see us test? Drop us a note below to let us know. Do hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, thank you very much for watching.